By 3:28, Ethan Carter had already rehearsed leaving twice. He sat alone at the corner table of Maple and Honey, that little neighborhood bakery that pretended not to know it was beautiful. Warm yellow light glowed from hanging lamps. Soft jazz hummed from an old speaker in the corner, and every table held a little glass jar with wildflowers that looked like they'd just been collected from some forgotten field outside of town. Outside, Denver's winter pressed its face against the window. Gray sky, frosted sidewalks, breath turned white in the air. Inside, hands brushed over mugs, spoons clinked, laughter rose and fell like a tide. Ethan's charcoal coat lay neatly on the back of his chair, his sleeves rolled to his forearms. He looked like the sort of man who had never once been late and had never once said something he didn't first measure. 35, well-built, dark hair trimmed close, eyes that seemed calm from a distance but carried something that never quite rested. He checked his watch, 3:29. The blind date was set for 3:30. He hated blind dates. He could negotiate multi-million-dollar mergers without sweating, could speak on stages under spotlights with cameras pointed at his face, could fire people twice his age when the board demanded it. But sit across from a stranger and try to be emotionally available. That felt like walking into a storm without a coat. He could still hear Olivia's voice, the one person who never let his silence trick her. Ethan, you're not a machine. You're a human being who lost someone. You closed every door and threw away the keys. I'm not asking you to fall in love. I'm asking you to show up once. For yourself. He remembered the way she had crossed her arms, that fierce, stubborn look in her eyes. Her name is Emma. She works here. She bakes half the things you inhale on your way back from meetings. She's kind, she works hard, and she's raising her daughter alone. She deserves someone gentle. And you. He tried to cut her off, but she'd kept going. And you deserve someone who lets you breathe. Not impress, not rescue, just breathe. So he'd said yes. One blind date. One Christmas season afternoon, in a bakery that smelled like cinnamon and second chances. He smoothed an invisible crease on the table, then glanced toward the counter. Emma wasn't there. A brunette with a messy bun and a nose ring manned the register, laughing with a customer. Another girl pulled a tray of croissants from the oven. No blonde ponytail. No quiet woman focused on her pies. Maybe she's in the back, he thought. Maybe she changed her mind. Maybe this was a mistake. 3:30. The bell above the door chimed. Ethan looked up, expecting a woman in a winter coat, maybe tugging at her gloves, scanning the room with nervous hope. Instead, the tiniest thing he'd ever seen walking into a blind date stepped over the threshold. She couldn't have been more than 4. A pink dress with little silver stars, white tights already dotted with one small grass stain on the knee, and shoes that clicked lightly against the floor. Her brown hair was tied into 2 pigtails, one perfectly centered, the other losing its battle with gravity. A puffy coat hung slightly crooked from her shoulders. She paused just inside the bakery, big brown eyes sweeping over the tables like she was on a mission. Those eyes found him like they'd been told exactly where he would be. Ethan straightened without meaning to. The girl headed straight for his table, her little shoes tapping with determined certainty. No hesitation, no shyness. She stopped right beside his chair, lifted her chin, and announced in a clear, small voice that cut through all the clatter. "Mom's sick, so I came instead." The bakery fell quiet in a way that wasn't loud, but you could feel it. A barista stopped mid-wipe. A couple near the window glanced over the top of their mugs. Even the music seemed to soften. Ethan blinked once. "I'm sorry," he asked, leaning down a bit to get to her eye level. She repeated it slower, as if maybe he didn't understand English. "Mom is sick, so I came instead." He swallowed a surprised laugh and turned slightly in his chair. "You came for your mom's date." She nodded solemnly, one hand gripping the strap of a tiny heart-shaped purse. He softened his voice, the way you do when you sense a fragile thing walking around in a world too big. And why would you do that? She looked down at the hem of her dress, fingers picking at a loose thread. When she spoke, her voice was smaller, but it did not waver. Because I heard Aunt Olivia say this could make Mommy happy. I don't know what a date is, but Mommy hasn't laughed in a very long time. Something in Ethan's chest moved. Not dramatically, not painfully, just moved, like an old door that hadn't been opened in years trying to remember its hinges. "What's your name?" he asked softly. The little girl lifted her head with simple pride. "I'm Sophie, I'm 4.5. Mommy is Emma, she works here, she makes the pies." Emma. The name that had been floating around the edges of his life. The quiet blonde he'd seen behind the counter on late evenings when he stopped in after endless meetings. Always focused, always polite. A woman who handed him a bag with a professional smile but carried a sadness he never named. Sophie continued before he could answer, words tumbling out like she'd rehearsed them. Mommy wanted to cancel. She said she was too sick and too tired. Then she frowned thoughtfully. But I thought if someone nice came, maybe she'd try to smile again. This child didn't understand dating, loneliness, widowhood, past hurts. But she understood one thing with terrifying clarity. Her mother needed a reason to laugh again. Ethan pulled out the chair beside him. "Well, Sophie," he said quietly, "do you like hot chocolate?" Her face lit up like a Christmas tree in the mall. "I like it with clouds," she said, "the fluffy ones." He glanced at the barista. "One hot chocolate with extra whipped cream for the young lady, please, and another coffee for me." As the drinks were prepared, he rested his elbows lightly on the table. "So," he said, "what makes your mom happy?" Sophie didn't even have to think. She swung her legs and began counting on her fingers. "She smiles when I draw her hearts, when I tell her she's pretty," a tiny pause, "when I say I miss Daddy but I'm glad she's here." The last line landed between them like something sacred. He swallowed. She pointed toward the glass display case. "And blueberry pie," she added. "She says blueberry is like a hug for your tummy." The waitress brought the hot chocolate, clouds of whipped cream piled high. Sophie gasped and clapped, immediately digging in with her spoon like she'd been starving for sweetness all day. Ethan watched her, the messy pigtails, the too big feelings, the mission. This wasn't what he'd expected when he said yes to a blind date. He thought it would be awkward small talk, polite smiles, maybe a pleasant but forgettable hour. Instead, a 4-year-old had walked in, looked straight at his life, and quietly rearranged the furniture. He didn't know whether Emma would come out from the back. He didn't know if this would ever turn into dinner, romance, anything at all. But as Sophie licked whipped cream from her upper lip and hummed to herself, he understood something with unexpected clarity. Tonight wasn't about meeting a woman. Tonight was about meeting the bravest little girl he had ever seen. "Is this your first date?" Sophie asked around a mouthful of whipped cream. If anyone else had asked, Ethan might have laughed it off, deflected, thrown up one of those polished answers he kept for nosy board members and overly curious journalists. But a 4-year-old with whipped cream on her nose didn't feel like a threat. "First blind date," he answered, "but I'm not sure the rule book expected you instead." She wrinkled her nose, thinking, blind date means you can't see right. He smiled, kind of, it just means you don't know the person you're meeting. "Oh," she considered that, then shrugged. "Well, I know Mommy, she's nice, so if you're not nice I won't let her come." "Is that so?" he said, hiding a smile. "I protect her," Sophie said, very matter-of-fact, like she was saying her favorite color. "Sometimes she cries in the bathroom, but she says it's just soap in her eyes." Sophie twisted the spoon in her hand. "I don't think soap goes in your heart." For a second, Ethan forgot how to breathe. He looked at this tiny person, legs swinging, eyes big and unguarded, and wondered how it was that some adults never learned the difference between honesty and cruelty, while some children were born knowing it. "You must be very strong," he said quietly, "to protect Mommy like that." Sophie shrugged. "She protects me, it's a trade." He chuckled softly. "Fair deal." She squinted at him then, really looked at him. The way children look at butterflies and shadows and strangers they're deciding on. "Where's your little girl or boy?" she asked suddenly. He blinked. "I don't have one," he said carefully. "I lost someone a long time ago, and I never really found my way back to people after that." He didn't know why he'd said it so plainly. He could have lied, could have said he was too busy, that work kept him occupied. But Sophie seemed like the kind of person who would notice lies even if she didn't understand them. She tilted her head, like she was trying to match his words to something she understood. "Mommy lost Daddy," she said softly. "We had to put all his shirts in a box. I hugged one and it smelled like him, and then I cried a lot. Mommy said it's because my heart is big. I told her she could have some of my heart until hers stops hurting." His throat felt tight. "What did she say?" he asked. Sophie's face softened. "She said I was her little miracle." He looked down at his coffee to avoid showing too much, then back at her. "You're something special, Sophie." She ducked her head, cheeks rosy. "That's what Aunt Olivia says," she mumbled. "She says I'm dangerous because I say everything in my brain." "That sounds about right." The bell above the door chimed sharply then, the cold air from outside dragging in with it a flurry of snowflakes. "Sophie." The voice was breathless, strained, edged with panic. A woman stood in the doorway, cheeks flushed from the cold, hair thrown into a messy ponytail that had once been carefully tied but now fought to stay together. An apron still hung crookedly around her waist, dusted faintly with flour. Her eyes swept the room frantically, then locked onto the table where her daughter sat happily with a stranger. "Mommy," Sophie waved the spoon like a flag. "He likes your happy pie." Emma's gaze flew to Ethan. Her eyes flicked over the napkin in his hand, the hot chocolate, the plate with crumbs of blueberry crust. 1,000 fears flashed behind her pupils in 1 second: danger, judgment, shame, misunderstanding. Ethan stood immediately, hands open at his sides. "I'm so sorry," he started. "She said you were sick. I didn't know she came on her own, I thought." Emma had already crossed the room, dropping to her knees beside Sophie's chair, pulling her into a tight hug. She exhaled a rush of relief against her daughter's hair. "You can't do that," she murmured. "You can't just walk out like that, baby." "I left a note," Sophie said, muffled against her chest, "next to the sugar." Emma closed her eyes briefly. Of course she had, of course she had. She pulled back, hands on her daughter's shoulders. "You scared me," she said gently. "You cannot leave without me, ever, okay?" Sophie nodded, eyes big and apologetic. "I just wanted you to be happy again," she whispered. "Aunt Olivia said." Emma closed her eyes for 1 microsecond, silently cursing her well-meaning friend. "I know what she said," she murmured, "but you are enough to make me happy. You don't have to fix anything, okay?" Sophie nodded again, but her little face looked like she still believed happiness was a group project. Emma stood slowly then, turning her attention to Ethan. "I'm sorry she bothered you," she said, voice controlled but worn thin. "I hope she wasn't in the way." Ethan shook his head. "She didn't bother me at all," he said. "She reminded me." "Of what?" He paused, then smiled faintly. "What kindness looks like." Something in Emma's eyes moved, a flicker, doubt, curiosity, fatigue. She really was as he remembered from the counter, blonde hair, soft features, eyes that looked like they once been bright but had learned how to dim themselves to survive. Her apron bore the faint ghost of cinnamon. Her hands, even now, smelled like butter and sugar. "You should have called the shop," she said. "I would have sent someone out." He shrugged lightly. "We were okay," he said. "We just talked." She looked at Sophie again, who was now dabbing her napkin into the last smear of whipped cream, unaware that she had just rearranged everyone's evening. Emma hesitated, then asked quietly, "Did she tell you everything?" "Enough," he answered gently. "Enough to know she loves you more than anything." Emma's expression cracked for just half a second, something fragile, something aching, and then pulled itself back together. "I should get her home," she said. "She needs rest." He nodded and stepped aside, giving them room to leave. Sophie clung to her mother's neck, but as they headed for the door, she looked back over Emma's shoulder. "You can come again," she called softly, "if you like happy pie." Ethan felt something in his chest loosen, an old knot tied tight around grief and isolation. "I'd like that," he said. The bell chimed again as they left. The winter wind slipping into the bakery, whispering over his hands before the door closed. He sat back down slowly, staring at the empty chair where Sophie had been. The blind date had never really started, but a door he'd nailed shut 3 years ago had just opened a crack. 2 days later, the grocery store hummed with the sound of ordinary life, shopping carts rolling, scanners beeping, muffled conversations floating up between aisles. Ethan wasn't supposed to be there. At least, that's what his assistant would say. His schedule didn't have wander around produce section like a normal person anywhere on it. But the board meeting had ended early, and he'd found himself driving toward the neighborhood where Maple and Honey sat, the steering wheel turning almost out of habit. He stopped at the small market down the street first, intending to grab coffee from the kiosk and nothing more. Then he saw her. Emma pushed a half-filled cart slowly down the produce aisle, reading labels with the seriousness of someone reading contracts. She wore a plain cardigan over a simple shirt, her hair pulled into a loose knot at the back of her head. Flour still dusted one sleeve. Her shoulders looked a little smaller than he remembered, as if the past 2 days had been heavy. In the child seat of the cart, Sophie sat hugging a worn plush bunny, humming to herself as she kicked her legs gently. Every few seconds, she would point excitedly at something: apples, oranges, a cereal box with a cartoon panda, then glance at her mother's face to see if she could read the answer there. Emma picked up 2 yogurt cups and turned them, comparing prices. It was such a small gesture, such a simple thing, but the concentration on her face told him more than any confession could. "Mommy, can I get the strawberry one?" Sophie asked. Emma glanced at the tag, then at her cart, then at her daughter. "Maybe next time, Bug," she said softly. "We still have plain yogurt at home." Sophie hesitated, then asked in a much quieter voice, "Which one is cheaper?" The words weren't manipulative. They were curious and careful, like this was a game she had learned far too early. Ethan felt a tightness in his chest. He wasn't here to pity them. He wasn't here to rescue anybody. But something about watching a 4-year-old learn the language of sacrifice made every spreadsheet he'd read that day look bleak. "Mommy, look," Sophie suddenly squealed, pointing toward the coffee kiosk at the end of the aisle. "It's the Happy Pie Man." Emma's hand froze on the handle of the cart. Slowly she turned her head. Their eyes met across a section of oranges and price labels. For a split second, Ethan saw the instinctive reaction, the flinch, the urge to turn away, to pretend not to see, to protect herself before anything could be expected of her. Then Sophie waved enthusiastically again, and that split second passed. Emma took a small breath and gave him a polite nod. He walked toward them, pushing his own hand basket more to give his hands something to do than out of necessity. "What a coincidence," he said lightly. "I didn't realize this store doubled as a bakery reunion spot." Emma let out a small laugh. It surprised both of them. "Just grabbing a few things before heading back," she said, trying to make sure she still sees something green on her plate before payday. Her tone wasn't apologetic. It was matter of fact, the the tired kind of humor that doesn't ask for sympathy. Sophie looked between them. "Did you come for yogurt too?" she asked. "I came for coffee," he said, "but yogurt sounds like a strong life decision." She seemed satisfied with that answer. They walked together down another aisle, the moment stretching longer than a polite hello, but not yet heavy enough to break. Emma reached for a bag of rice, squinting at the unit price. Sophie tugged on the cart handle. "Mommy," she whispered, "can we get the peanut butter with the bears on it?" Her mother smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "We still have some left at home, Bug. We're just getting what we need today." Ethan looked away briefly, not because he pitied them, but because he felt like he was eavesdropping on an intimacy that wasn't words. At the checkout, Emma unloaded items onto the belt in a careful sequence, watching each number appear on the screen like it mattered deeply, because it did. As the cashier scanned the last item, she quietly put back a small package of cookies. "Sorry, not that one," she said. Sophie's eyes followed the cookies as if they were a balloon drifting away. She didn't complain. While Emma dug for her card in her worn wallet, Ethan moved to the register next door, leaning over to quietly speak to the cashier. "Could you do me a favor?" he asked. The teenage boy nodded, eager at the prospect of any kind of variety. "Scan this first," Ethan said, handing him a gift card and a folded note. "Apply whatever's left to that woman's bill, and add a bag of those apples she was looking at earlier. Don't tell her who it's from." The boy's eyes widened, but he nodded quickly. "Yes, sir." Ethan paid for his own coffee and a few unnecessary items, then moved toward the exit, lingering just past the sliding doors. Through the glass, he watched Emma accept the bags, confusion flickering across her face as the cashier said something and gestured at the receipt. She frowned, looked at the extra small paper sack they'd handed her, the one with 2 warm pastries inside, and then looked around. Their eyes met. He didn't wave. He just offered a small nod, and a smile that said what he didn't want to turn into words. "It's okay, let this one be easy." Emma didn't shout a thank you across the store. She didn't rush over to refuse to argue. She simply held the bag a little closer to her chest, looked down at Sophie, and smiled softly. "Looks like the universe wanted you to have cookies today," she murmured. "Or happy pie," Sophie said, peeking into the bag. "Can the universe like us every day?" Emma laughed, a real one this time, and Ethan felt it even from where he stood. As they walked out into the cold evening, he remained in his car, hands resting on the steering wheel. He watched them move down the sidewalk, 2 figures huddled together, sharing weight in that way only people who belong to each other do. He didn't chase them, didn't follow. He just watched until they turned the corner, then exhaled slowly. Later that night, in a tiny kitchen with chipped tiles and a stove that groaned when it heated, Emma stood at the counter, hands deep in flour, sugar, and butter. Not for work, for something else. In front of her sat a small tart shell cooling on a wire rack. She poured glossy blueberry filling into it, the scent of vanilla and lemon zest curling into the air. When it was done, she let it chill, then wrapped the tart carefully in parchment and slid it into a simple white box. She tied a blue ribbon around it, her now cold fingers clumsy but determined. On a small card she wrote in neat, slightly uneven handwriting, "For someone who brings sunshine quietly." The next morning, Ethan walked into his office, a glass-walled corner on the 22nd floor of Caltech headquarters, and found the box sitting on his desk. There was no name, no return address, just the faint scent of cinnamon and blueberries. He stared at the card for a long time before opening the box. He took one bite, then set the fork down slowly. Sunshine quietly, he thought. He knew exactly who it was from. And for the first time in a long while, the view of the city from his office windows felt less like distance and more like possibility. The rain came down hard 3 nights later. Not a gentle drizzle, not something pretty you'd want to watch from a window with a mug in your hands. It was the kind of rain that turned sidewalks into slick mirrors and punched cold straight through your coat. Emma hurried down the block, one hand gripping a flimsy umbrella that the wind kept trying to turn inside out, the other wrapped firmly around Sophie's fingers. Their grocery bag swung from her wrist, heavy with things that had to stretch across a week: pasta, rice, 2 apples, a carton of eggs. The heater in their building had been stuttering all week, so had the rent notice taped to their door. "Almost home," she said, tightening her grip on Sophie's hand as they crossed the puddle-filled parking lot. Sophie's hoodie was already damp at the edges, her little sneakers no match for the rivers forming along the curb. "I don't mind the rain," Sophie said, chin lifted bravely. "It's just the sky taking a shower." Emma smiled despite the chill working its way beneath her skin. "I mind it when it makes you cold," she said. "Come on, bug." Headlights swept across them suddenly, carving light into the dark drizzle. A silver SUV slowed beside the sidewalk. The window rolled down. "Emma." The voice was familiar now. She turned, squinting against the rain. Ethan stepped out of the driver's side, a large black umbrella appearing in his hand like it had always belonged there. In one smooth motion, he tilted it to cover both her and Sophie. "What are you doing out in this?" he asked, his brows lifting in concern. "Walking home," she said, as if it were the simplest thing in the world. The bus wasn't worth waiting for in this weather. He glanced at Sophie's soaked shoes, at Emma's trembling fingers gripping thin plastic bags. "Get in," he said softly. "You'll both catch pneumonia like this." She hesitated. Pride and exhaustion had never gotten along well inside her. "I don't want to be a burden," she murmured. His eyes met hers, steady and kind. "You're not," he said. "You're a person in the rain, that's all." She swallowed, then nodded once. Inside the car, warmth wrapped around them. The heater hummed, defrosting the windshield in slow waves. Sophie sighed with relief, hugging her bunny and watching raindrops race each other down the glass. "Is this what castle carriages feel like?" she asked. "Something like that," Ethan said, buckling his own seat belt, "only with worse music." The radio, still faintly tuned to some business news station, chattered quietly in the background. He turned it off. They drove in comfortable silence for a few minutes, the rhythm of the wipers the only sound. As they turned down the narrow lane that led to Emma's building, Ethan's jaw tightened slightly. He'd seen rough neighborhoods, had grown up near places that looked like this. But seeing Sophie's pink shoes bouncing against the cracked floor mats in his back seat made the peeling paint and broken railing feel like an insult. The building loomed ahead, 3 stories of weary brick, its front steps slick with rain. A rusted metal sign beside the door displayed the barely legible unit numbers. Someone had wedged a folded piece of cardboard under one of the steps to keep it from rocking. The front door creaked open before they reached it. The landlady stood on the covered porch, a thin sweater thrown over her shoulders, arms crossed. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of the sleek SUV and the man stepping out of it. "Emma," she called, her tone sharp. "You're 2 weeks late on the rent. Today's the last day. I can't keep your room open forever, you know. I've got other people waiting." Sophie stiffened beside her, shrinking just a little closer to her mother. "We'll figure it out," Emma said quietly. "I told you I'd." "You tell me a lot of things," the woman cut in. "Telling doesn't pay the bills. You've got a kid. You shouldn't be flirting with eviction." The word landed like a slap. Emma's back straightened, but her cheeks burned. "I'm not flirting with anything," she replied, keeping her voice even. "I'm working double shifts." "Then maybe you should work triple," the landlady snapped, eyes flicking toward Ethan like he was some kind of explanation she didn't like. "Or start asking your friends with fancy cars for help." Sophie's small hand tightened painfully around Emma's fingers. "Did we do something wrong, Mommy?" she whispered. Emma shook her head quickly. "No, Bug," she said, "we didn't." Ethan's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. Not yet. This was her battle, her dignity. He crouched down to Sophie's level, ignoring the rain seeping into the knees of his trousers. "You were very brave in the storm," he said gently, "and you're going to be just fine, okay?" She nodded, eyes unsure but trusting. He straightened and caught Emma's gaze. "I'll let you two get inside," he said quietly. "Text me if you need anything." She opened her mouth to argue, to say she wouldn't, but something in his expression stopped her. Instead, she just nodded. "Thank you," she said, "for the ride." He dipped his head slightly. "Any time." He waited in the car until he saw the door close behind them. Only then did he pull away from the curb, his hands tight on the steering wheel. By morning, Emma had scrubbed the kitchen floor twice, cleaned out the fridge, and folded every piece of laundry in the house. None of it made the knot in her chest loosen. Sophie had drawn quietly at the table, tongue poking out between her lips in concentration. When the knot came, it was sharp and quick. Emma wiped her damp hands on her jeans and opened the door. The landlady stood there again. Only this time she was smiling. "I just got off the phone with the office," she said, voice sugar-sweet. "Looks like your worrying days are over for a while. Someone just paid 6 months of rent in advance. In cash." Emma stared at her. "What?" she breathed. "That's not possible, I didn't." "And the plumber's coming tomorrow to fix that heater and your kitchen sink," the landlady continued, rearranging her tone into something that sounded almost like friendliness. "Looks like you've got yourself a guardian angel, honey." Emma gripped the edge of the door. "There must be a mistake," she insisted. "I can't accept." "Mistake or not, the money been processed," the landlady said briskly. "You're set till summer. Try not to ruin it." She turned and shuffled back down the hallway, humming to herself. Emma closed the door slowly. Her heart pounded so loud she could hear it in her ears. "Mommy," Sophie peeked around the corner, clutching a sheet of paper. "Did we get in trouble?" "No," Emma said softly. "No, Bug, we were okay for a while." She slid down the wall until she was sitting on the floor, head back, eyes stinging. Sophie padded over and climbed into her lap without asking. "I finished it," she said, holding up the drawing. On the paper, 3 figures stood under a sky filled with blue scribbles. A woman with yellow hair, a small girl in a pink dress, and a tall man holding something over their heads, a big crooked shape with raindrops bouncing off it. "That's you," Sophie said, tapping the yellow-haired figure. "And that's me, and that's the man who brings sunshine when it rains." The umbrella man. Emma swallowed past the tightness in her throat. "We should not let other people pay for our homes, Sophie," she whispered. "But what if they want to?" Sophie asked innocently. "What if that's how they say they care?" The question was too big and too simple at the same time. Emma didn't have an answer. So she did what she knew how to do. She went to work. That afternoon, between orders and deliveries, between frosting cupcakes and slicing pies, Emma found herself measuring butter for a tart shell that wasn't on the menu. She worked quietly, the familiar motions calming her hands even if her heart still raced. Flour, butter, sugar, cold water. Press, chill, bake. Blueberries simmered in a pot with sugar and lemon, their scent curling through the kitchen like memory. When it was done and cooled, she slid the tart into a small white box, tied it with a simple ribbon, and wrote one line on a clean card. "For someone who brings sunshine quietly." She didn't sign her name. She didn't need to. The next time Ethan walked into Maple and Honey, he wasn't in his usual business armor. No perfectly knotted tie, no pressed suit. Just dark jeans, a soft sweater, and the expression of a man walking into a place that had begun to matter. The bell chimed. The warmth hit his face like welcome. Emma was behind the counter, stacking boxes. Her hair was pulled back, but a loose strand had escaped and curled near her cheek. She glanced up at the sound. For half a second she froze. Then she smiled, small and shy but real. "I figured," he said, approaching the counter, "that blueberry tart deserved a sequel." "You ate it." "Every crumb." "Good," she said, amusement flickering in her eyes. "I was afraid you'd hand it to some assistant and forget about it." He shook his head. "I don't hand sunshine away." From the back, Sophie's voice rang out like a bell. "Is it him? Is it the umbrella man?" She came barreling through the swinging door, apron strings flapping, face lit up like a holiday window. "It is," she shouted, launching herself at his legs and hugging them tightly. "You came back." "I promised I'd come try more happy pie," he said, ruffling her hair. "And I'm a man of my word." "Well," Emma cut in, her tone light, "if you're a man of your word, you're now on dish-drying duty. I'm short-staffed today." He glanced at the stack of trays behind her, then at the customers in line. "Tell me where you keep the towels," he said, already stepping around the counter. Emma blinked. "I was joking." "I wasn't," he replied easily. "I'm certified in stirring, carrying things, and saying, 'Have a nice day,' without sounding sarcastic. Put me where you need me." There was a moment, a tiny beat, when she could have said no, could have insisted on keeping a line between them, between his world and hers. Then she remembered the warmth of her apartment that morning, when the heater finally kicked in. "That drawer," she said, nodding toward the counter. "Clean towels are there. Try not to break the mugs. They're older than you." He grinned and rolled up his sleeves. Within minutes, Ethan was behind the counter, wiping trays as they came from the sink, passing out napkins, refilling sugar jars. Customers did double takes, eyes flicking between their cappuccinos and the famous face drying dishes like he'd been born to it. A silver-haired woman reached for her latte and beamed at him. "Your husband's a keeper," she said to Emma with an approving nod. "Not many men will do the dishes in public." Emma's cheeks flamed. "He's not," she started, but the woman was already walking away. She glanced at Ethan, expecting him to correct it, to laugh it off, to put some distance between them with a joke. He didn't. He only looked at her, eyes warm, lips quirking in a small, knowing smile. He didn't say he was her husband. But for the first time, he also didn't say he was. It was a Tuesday when everything quietly shifted. Emma's phone buzzed at 8 in the morning, right as she was pulling cinnamon rolls from the oven. "Hello," she answered, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she slid the tray onto the counter. "Emma, it's Marta," came the voice of her coworker. "The morning baker called in sick and the manager's losing it. Can you come cover? Like now." Emma glanced toward the clock, her heart rate jumping. "But I have to pick Sophie up from preschool at 3, she said. "I can't stay late." "Please," Marta begged. "We're drowning. I'll cover your closing shift next week. Just help us today." Emma closed her eyes. 3 o'clock. Preschool pickup. She looked at the bills pinned under a magnet on her fridge in her mind. "I'll figure something out," she said. "I'll be there in 20. The problem was, there was no one to ask. Her parents lived 3 states away. Her husband's family barely called anymore, the grief too tangled in all of them. Neighbors worked odd jobs, and she'd already asked too many favors this month. Her thumb hovered over Ethan's name in her phone. They exchanged numbers after the grocery incident, just in case. What if it's too much? What if I'm crossing a line? What if? Her phone buzzed again. A text this time. "Ethan, morning. Headed past Maple and Honey later. Need coffee, or are you already fueled by sugar fumes?" She stared at the screen. Then her fingers flew. "Actually, could I ask for something else? I just got called into an extra shift. I won't make it to Sophie's school at 3. Could you pick her up just today? She added 3 messages in rapid succession. I'm so sorry. It's okay if you can't. I shouldn't have asked. 3 dots appeared, then disappeared, then appeared again. Of course, he replied. Text me the address and password. I'm already on my way. She stared at the words for a long moment. Already on my way. Like he'd been ready long before she asked. The preschool playground smelled of damp mulch and spilled juice. Children's laughter mingled with the sound of squeaky swings and teachers' voices. Ethan waited by the gate, hands in his pockets, feeling oddly more nervous than he had before any investor pitch. Parents came and went, calling their kids' names, bundling them into coats, ushering them toward cars. He scanned the crowd for brown pigtails. Then he saw her. Sophie, in a pink jacket and star-patterned leggings, spotted him first. Her face lit up like fireworks. That's my new daddy, she shouted at the top of her lungs, barreling toward him with arms open wide. Conversation around them stuttered. A few parents chuckled. A nearby teacher raised an amused eyebrow. Ethan froze, caught between surprise and something that felt embarrassingly like joy. She slammed into his chest, hugging him like she meant it. He knelt, heart pounding for reasons that had nothing to do with exertion. Is that so? He asked softly. She nodded fiercely. You picked me up, that's what daddies do. He could have corrected her. He could have laughed gently, explained that he was just a friend, that these words were too big and too soon. He didn't. Instead, he brushed a stray curl from her forehead and said quietly, where only she could hear, Then I better be a really good one, huh? She beamed. He signed her out with the password Emma had sent. The teacher gave him a long look, weighing something in her mind, then smiled. She talks about you, she said, the umbrella man. He chuckled. Seems I have a reputation. They stopped for ice cream on the way back, because that's what you do when a 4-year-old declares you her new father in front of 12 witnesses and 3 teachers. In the pastel-colored shop, Sophie swung her feet under the table, chocolate dribbling down her cone, chattering between bites. Mommy likes pistachio when she's sad, she announced, but strawberry when she's happy. I think strawberry is winning now. Is that right? She nodded, licking her cone with focus. And sometimes she falls asleep, hugging the laundry basket. Ethan laughed. Why would she do that? Because she's tired, Sophie said simply. And I think she tries to hug everything she has so she doesn't miss Daddy too much. The image hit him right in the center of his chest. A woman in a tiny apartment, asleep on the couch with a laundry basket still warm from the dryer, clinging to small things so the big pain didn't swallow her. He watched Sophie eat the last bite of her cone. How do you know all this? He asked softly. She shrugged, turning her empty hands over. I live there, she said. I see stuff. On the drive back, she hummed along to whatever soft song the radio decided to play, eyes half closed, full from ice cream and attention. When they pulled up to the old building, Emma was already on the porch, apron still tied around her waist, like she'd run straight from the bakery. Sophie flung open the car door and launched herself out. I had ice cream with Daddy, she announced. Emma stiffened. Sophie, she said gently but firmly, Ethan is Mommy's friend. Sophie frowned, turning between them. But he picked me up, she said, confused. And he brought us home in the rain. And he fixed the lights and the sink and he eats happy pie. That's what daddies do. Emma's gaze met Ethan. His heart hammered. He could have backed away. He could have shrugged and made a joke, letting the moment slide into something safe and forgettable. Instead, he stepped forward, wiping his palms discreetly against his jeans, as if preparing to hold something delicate. He took a breath. "I want to be her dad," he said quietly. The words surprised even him, not because they weren't true, but because there they were, standing in the drizzle, exposed and alive. Emma stared at him. "You barely know us," she said, her voice small and rough around the edges. He shook his head. "I know enough," he replied. "I know she trusts me. I know you are the bravest person I've met in years. I know that ever since a little girl walked into a blind date and sat down instead of her mom, my life hasn't felt as empty." He paused, letting the truth rest between them. "I'm not saying I deserve that title right now," he added, glancing at Sophie, who was now sitting on the step with her bunny. "I'm saying I want to earn it, if you'll let me." Silence settled around them, broken only by the patter of light rain on concrete. Emma's fingers tightened around the edge of her apron. For so long her life had been about survival. Do the next thing, pay the next bill, bake the next tray, get through the next night. Love, romance, family. Those things had become vocabulary words from another language. Now a man stood on her cracked front path and offered not rescue, not perfection, but something even more impossible. A choice. She looked down at Sophie, humming quietly to herself, drawing circles in a puddle with the toe of one shoe. Then she looked up at Ethan. Her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I don't know how to be enough for someone like you, with your world, with all your everything." His expression softened. "My world," he repeated. "Emma, my world is boardrooms and people who pretend not to be scared. Your world is flour on your sleeves and a little girl who draws castles. I think I like your world better." She let out a sound that was half laugh, half sob. "You don't know how messy it is," she whispered. "I know exactly how messy it is," he said, "and I'm still here." He took one small step closer. "Let me stay," he said simply. "Not as a CEO, not as some guy with a nice car, just as Ethan. Just as someone who wants to carry grocery bags and show up at preschool and eat burnt cookies because Sophie decorated them." Her shoulders dropped slightly, like something heavy had shifted inside her. "We can try," she whispered. The words weren't grand, but for them it was almost a vow. What came next didn't happen overnight. There were no montages, no time-lapse of seasons spinning in fast motion. Just days. Ordinary days. Ethan started stopping by Maple and Honey more often, but not always to buy something. Some mornings he'd roll up his sleeves and help the staff carry sacks of flour from the back. Other evenings he'd pop in just before closing, tie an apron over his clothes, and wash the last stack of dishes side by side with Emma. They fell into a rhythm. Sunday mornings, he made pancakes in Emma's tiny kitchen, learning quickly that Sophie preferred hers in the shape of stars, not circles. She would sit on the counter, swinging her legs, covered in batter and opinions. "Too much syrup," she'd declare. "Mommy likes just a little, Daddy likes a lot." Then she'd grin like she'd discovered some great mystery of the universe. Weeknights, they'd sometimes eat at his place, a modern apartment with clean lines and big windows that had always felt a bit too empty. Emma would bring leftovers from the bakery. Sophie would spread crayons on his pristine coffee table like she owned the space. The first time Sophie fell asleep with her head on his chest during a cartoon, remote still in her small hand, Ethan didn't move for a full hour. His arm went numb. He didn't care. Emma, curled up beside them, dozed off with her head on his shoulder. He looked down at them, at this accidental cluster of limbs and blankets, and thought, This is what breathing feels like." There were awkward moments. The first time he showed up with a brand new coat for Sophie, something he'd seen on a rack and bought without thinking, Emma's jaw clenched. "I can't accept this," she said quietly after Sophie had run to the bathroom to try it on in front of the mirror. "It's just a coat," he replied. "She needed a warmer one." "It's not just a coat," she insisted. It's more than I could afford without thinking, and I need to be enough for her without you fixing everything." He sobered. "Okay," he said. "Then tell me what enough looks like for you, and I'll follow your lead." She stared at him, caught off guard that he hadn't argued, hadn't insisted. "It looks like," she began slowly, "you being here because you want to be. Not because we need something. Not because you feel guilty. Just because you like making us pancakes." He smiled. "I do like making you pancakes," he admitted. "And I like my title being the guy who burns the second batch more than CEO." She rolled her eyes, but her lips curved. They agreed to small things. He wouldn't pay off any more rent without telling her first. She would let him fix things that were broken around the apartment without turning it into an argument. He would show up for school events when he could. She would let herself lean just a little. One evening, months later, the three of them stood outside Maple and Honey, now with a new sign painted in soft script above the door. Maple and Honey Bakery, home of happy pie. Inside, the lights glowed warmly. Outside, the spring air felt soft against their skin. Sophie held both their hands, swinging between them. "Can we go to the park?" she asked. "In a bit," Emma said. "Mommy has one more order to finish. Then we'll go feed the ducks." "Ducks like happy pie?" Sophie asked seriously. "Ducks like anything that falls on the ground," Ethan said. "They're not picky." Emma unlocked the bakery door, then paused, turning back to them. "You know," she said, looking at Ethan with a different kind of softness in her eyes, "I used to think my life ended the night my husband died. Like everything after that would just be leftover days." He listened. "But now," she continued, "I think that maybe the story just took a painful turn. And this," she gestured around them at the bakery, at Sophie skipping over a crack in the sidewalk, at him, "this is the chapter where something new happens." He didn't answer with words. He stepped forward, cupped her face gently in his hands and kissed her, softly, carefully, like he was touching something precious. Sophie squealed. She said, but she was smiling so wide it nearly split her face. The proposal wasn't a grand spectacle. There were no fireworks, no orchestra, no choreographed videos. Just a Tuesday night in their small kitchen. Emma was rinsing dishes. Sophie sat at the table coloring a picture of our family at the park with great passion. Ethan stood by the stove, stirring something in a pot more out of habit than necessity. "Mommy, how many people are in our family?" Sophie asked suddenly. Emma glanced over, drying her hands on a towel. "3," she said, "you, me, and—" She looked at Ethan. He looked at her. Sophie rolled her eyes in exaggerated dramatics. "And Daddy," she finished. "Obviously, are we ever going to have a just 3 picture, all of us, like in those frames at the store?" Ethan reached into his pocket. His heart was beating hard enough that he could feel it at the base of his throat. He pulled out a small pastry box, heart-shaped, with a ribbon tied crookedly around it. "Speaking of frames," he said, placing it on the table, "I have something to ask about that." Emma stared at the box. "You brought dessert?" she asked, amused. "Open it," he said. There was no crowd. No cameras. Just the hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of a cartoon playing from the living room. She untied the ribbon and lifted the lid. Inside, nestled where a tart might have been, sat a ring. Not huge, not gaudy, a simple band with a small, clear stone and a tiny inscription etched on the inside. She picked it up with trembling fingers. "What does it say?" Sophie asked, crawling up onto her knees to see. Emma tilted the ring, reading the tiny words. "Our happiest recipe," she whispered. "Love, patience, and a little flour." She looked up, eyes already shining. "Emma," Ethan said, voice low and steady, "I won't promise you a life without storms. I won't promise I'll never mess up. I probably will burn pancakes, forget to buy milk, and stand in the wrong line at the grocery store." She laughed through her tears. "But I can promise," he continued, "to keep showing up, to be here when the rain starts, to hold your hand when you're tired and let you hold mine when I am, to love you and Sophie like you're my whole world, because you are." He took her hand, the one not holding the ring. "If you'll have me," he said softly, "I'd like to be officially what your daughter already decided I am." He didn't say the words, "Will you marry me?" out loud. He didn't need to. Emma nodded, tears spilling over. "We've been waiting long enough," she whispered. Sophie clapped both hands over her mouth, eyes huge. "Does that mean we're a just three?" she asked. "For real?" Emma laughed and cried at the same time. "For real," she said. Ethan slid the ring onto her finger, then pulled both of them into his arms. It wasn't perfect. The sink was still full of dishes. A pot was threatening to boil over. Crayons rolled off the table and onto the floor. But in that messy, ordinary kitchen, something extraordinary settled in. Not the start of love. Not the peak. Just the moment they all agreed to stay. Months later, maple and honey looked different and the same all at once. The pastries were still warm, the coffee still strong. The same little bell chimed above the door, but now on a shelf near the cash register, next to jars of homemade jam, stood a simple white frame. Inside it, a photograph. Emma in her flour-dusted apron, smiling real and wide. Ethan beside her, sleeves rolled up, one hand resting on the counter, the other holding Sophie's hand. And Sophie in the middle, holding a cupcake in one fist and gripping Ethan's thumb with her other hand like she never planned to let go. Underneath the picture, in Emma's neat handwriting, a small sign read, "Our sweetest recipe, love, patience, and a little flour." Customers would pause there sometimes, tray in hand, drawn by something they couldn't quite name. They smile, then move on, feeling just a little warmer than when they'd walked in. Regulars knew the story. They knew that the millionaire CEO who owned the shiny office building downtown now spent as much time debating frosting flavors as he did profitability. They knew that the baker who once cried over rent notices now laughed loudly when her daughter declared herself assistant manager of quality control. They knew that family didn't always arrive the way movies said it would. Sometimes it walked in late. Sometimes it showed up with a broken umbrella. Sometimes it started with a little girl in a pink dress walking into a blind date and saying, "Mom is sick, so I came instead." And if you'd walked into Maple and Honey on a random afternoon, maybe you'd see it. Sophie behind the counter, proudly arranging cookie samples. Emma sliding a tray into the oven, humming under her breath. Ethan leaning over the counter, listening to a customer talk about their day as if it were the most important meeting in the world. No red carpets. No headlines. No dramatic music. Just kindness, just choosing, just staying. Day after day. Thank you for spending time with Ethan, Emma, and little Sophie. Three people who prove that sometimes the most beautiful love stories don't come with grand gestures, but with quiet moments, warm pie, and someone who shows up when it's raining. She was supposed to have a blind date with a stranger. Instead, her 4-year-old daughter walked in, sat down, and changed everything. If this story made your heart feel a little softer, if it brought a smile to your face or a tear to your eye, I'd love for you to stay with us. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Kindness and Love Tales for more soul-touching stories about second chances, unexpected families, and love that shows up in the most ordinary places. Your support helps keep these stories alive and reaching more hearts, just like yours. We'll see you in the next one, where love always finds a way.